Many people today in our high-speed, technologically advanced world regard the bicycle as a very humble means of transportation, although its appearance way back in the 1800s was revolutionary. Travel quickly became practical and inexpensive thanks to the bicycle, and business boomed for the manufacturers, most notably based in the industrial Midlands. The step forward from pedal power to motorised power happened somewhere between the late 19th and early 20th century, when an engine was attached to a motorcycle frame. Like many good ideas throughout history, numerous engineers seem to have been inspired with the same thought at the same time, and, in the case of the motorcycle, this happened throughout Europe, in England, Germany and France, as well as across the Atlantic in America. This programme is a celebration of the very best of British motorcycles, and will take you on a nostalgic journey in search of machines that date back to the early 1900s, yet still run to this very day. So, without further preamble, it's time to take to the open road to enjoy the sights, sounds and thrills of a bygone age. When it comes to classic British motorcycles, there are few machines that can inspire the true enthusiast quite like the Ariels. And although this manufacturer is generally less well known than the likes of Triumph, Norton and BSA, those that have been rescued and restored are equally as well loved as their more famous counterparts. Birmingham was at the very heart of the British motorcycle industry, and Ariel was no exception, starting life as a bicycle manufacturer in the Selly Oak district of the city towards the end of the 19th century. With innovative wire-spoked wheels and a lightweight frame, even the bicycles were revolutionary, and when the first Ariel motorcycle appeared in 1901, complete with a Minerva 211cc engine, powered machines quickly became the company's forte. A year later, the engineer Charles Sangster and his family took over Ariel and designed a 3-speed, 2-stroke motorcycle with a clutch and kickstart, known as the Arielette. But progress came to an abrupt halt with the outbreak of World War I. Like so many of their fellow motorcycle manufacturers, factory production was given over to military requisition. Although the war ended in 1918, it took a while for Ariel to resume civilian production in 1919, and the V-twin motorcycles in solo and sidecar forms continued with little alteration. But Ariel not only manufactured motorcycles, they also produced cars that were at this time failing to perform in the post-war marketplace. Urgent action was required, and when Ariel engaged the services of JAP's former chief designer Val Page in 1925 to create a new type of motorcycle, matters improved dramatically. Val Page's elegantly simple single-cylinder 496cc overhead valve and 557cc side valve engines were state-of-the-art, and the new company slogan, Ariel the Modern Motorcycle, certainly reflected this. In a very short space of time, Ariel motorcycles advanced at a fantastic pace. Edward Turner, another inspirational designer, arrived, bringing ideas for a unique 4-cylinder engine, which materialised as the legendary Square 4, or the Squariel as it was affectionately nicknamed. world events had taken something of a hand in Ariel's fortunes as the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression affected Britain as well as America. Financial troubles forced a complete restructure, and the Square 4 really did put the company back into the black. The new Ariel image also received an injection of a different colour when the Red Hunter models lived up to their name. Again, world events overtook Ariel as the outbreak of a Second World War took its toll. The production line was reduced to military motorcycles for the duration of the conflict, and just as peace began to appear over the horizon, in 1944, the company was taken over by BSA. Sadly, Ariel stagnated after the war, despite such classics as the Huntmaster, which used an Ariel frame with a BSA engine. Further attempts at innovation in the following years culminated in poor sales, and the 1970s Ariel 3 50cc motorised trike was the final disaster. There's no doubt that the years between the two world wars were Ariel's finest, so, without further ado, let's step back to those better days and enjoy some of the finest British motorcycles ever made. It's hard to believe, looking at this fine Ariel motorcycle, a 500cc overhead valve model from 1926, that it was actually brought home by its present owner as a derelict pile of parts in a wheelbarrow. In fairness, that was 20 years ago, and a great deal of dedicated restoration work has gone into getting this motorcycle back on the road. However, the hours spent on restoration and the sheer engineering ingenuity that has brought this classic Ariel up to speed has made this a remarkably rewarding enterprise, and for anyone considering taking on such a project, just watching what can only be described as poetry in motion is truly inspirational. There are those who might ask, why Ariel? What's the fascination with this particular make of motorcycle? As you watch this 1926 Ariel in action, these are questions that are easily and immediately answered. But there's more than just aesthetics to consider. Because the Ariels are not quite so well known or collected as the likes of Triumph, BSA and Norton, the spares are generally speaking more plentiful and far more reasonably priced. Also, thanks to the straightforward design, it's even possible to fix many of the mechanical problems you might encounter at the roadside, which can be very useful indeed. With a 1926 vintage, this Ariel is the oldest machine to feature in this programme, but it was a landmark model in the evolution of the Birmingham manufacturer. Up until World War I, Ariel had focused on developing motorcycles for a rapidly expanding number of intrepid travellers, and although the motorcar was beginning to make an appearance, it was definitely a prerogative of the wealthy. The motorcycle had a price tag that made it far more accessible to the ordinary man, and, for that matter, woman, a circumstance that would remain in the motorcycle's favour for many years to come. Moving on in time, our next motorcycle dates back to 1932, and truly is a landmark machine. This is the classic Red Hunter, featuring a tuned 4 overhead valve 500cc engine that marked a distinct improvement in Ariel's fortunes. Up until the launch of this motorcycle in 1932, a little like Henry Ford's motorcars, Ariel machines had been predominantly black, and the addition of colour was positively revolutionary. So much so that when this motorcycle first rolled off the production line with its red tank panels, it was named the Red Hunter. To set the launch of the 1932 Red Hunter in context, it's important to look at how Ariel bounced back onto the motorcycle market under the leadership of Jack Sangster. If you mention the name of Ariel Motorcycles in general company, the one model that almost everyone will name is the Ariel Square 4, which really was the comeback special. Val Page's stylish Ariel singles were certainly popular, but Edward Turner's favoured a unique four-cylinder design that effectively placed two 180-degree parallel twins coupled together to run in opposite directions. When the first production models appeared at the Olympia Motorcycle Show in 1930, they caused a sensation, and Ariel was definitely a force to be reckoned with. Consequently, when the Red Hunter made its debut in 1932, motorcyclists were ready and waiting for the next Ariel innovation. Throughout the early 1930s, there were further modifications and additions to the Red Hunter range, including a 250cc and 350cc versions. For Ariel, the Red Hunter proved to be as successful as the Gold Star had been for BSA. There were many competitive outings for the Red Hunters, and success followed success, and popularity soared. This extract from Ariel's advertising campaign for the 1935 500cc Red Hunter says it all. The 500cc Red Hunter, acclaimed by all as being the outstanding sports machine of 1934, is better than ever for 1935. Capable of being tuned to speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, it places no limit to the scope of the enthusiastic tuner and rider. The new long-stroke engine is now offered with a 2-port head or with a single-port head without extra charge. The fins, which in conjunction with the improved finning of the nickel-chrome iron cylinder barrel, give increased conductivity and longer wear. The massive crankcase and flywheel assembly are designed to withstand still higher maximum speeds and inertia loads. It's incredible to think that when these words were written in Ariel's advertising department more than 60 years ago, the designers would never have dreamt that the original Red Hunters they were waxing so lyrical about would still be travelling the roads of Britain. And what's more, if you study the internet for information relating to Ariel's Red Hunter, you'll find they're ridden all over the world. Details of a 1935 500cc Red Hunter in California makes for interesting reading. On the other side of the world, a very similar machine to the one you are watching here always starts on the first or second kick, before running extremely smoothly in the Californian sunshine. There's been some restoration with wiring, camshaft and followers needing attention, but overall there are few problems to speak of, and you'll find similar accounts of classic Ariels in Finland, Denmark, Belgium, New Zealand and Australia, to mention but a few. The valuation of the Californian Ariel is a pleasantly reassuring $8,500, although the owners featured in this programme rarely discuss their machines in terms of monetary value. These motorcycles are living, breathing pieces of history. Investment, in terms of hard cash, time, effort, energy and enthusiasm, will usually be considered as a privilege and pleasure rather than a chore. However, that said, those aerial owners who have managed to save a pile of rusting old scrap and restore it to a pristine example of aerial engineering will take great satisfaction in a generous valuation, even if it's the saving of a classic motorcycle to be put back on the road. That's the major motivational force. As we watch this 1946 aerial being put through its paces, it may not seem terribly different from the 1932 version, but a great deal certainly happened at Ariel between these two machines. The Red Hunter was undoubtedly one of the mainstays of Ariel during the 1930s and the years of difficult trading through the Depression. The entire range was trimmed down to 250, 350 and 500cc overhead valve deluxe and Red Hunter models. There was also a 600cc side valve sidecar machine and of course the Square 4s. Then, on a seemingly normal Sunday morning in September 1939, the people of Britain stopped what they were doing to listen to an historic radio broadcast. The lawnmowers were silenced, newspapers put aside, and even the motorcycle enthusiasts came in from tinkering in their sheds. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announced the grave news. Britain was at war with Germany, and although initially everyone returned to their affairs, it wasn't long until the full implications of Chamberlain's declaration began to hit home. For Ariel, all civilian production was brought to an abrupt halt as the British government took over the company's entire output, calling for a purpose-built machine for dispatch riders. A standard 350cc single was the order of the day, and although it lacked the finesse of this stylish Red Hunter, it was a robust motorcycle that off-roaded more than adequately. As a company, Ariel took their wartime patriotic duties very seriously, and during the years of conflict put out an advertisement titled "On Top of Our Job," with words that summed up the mood of the war for the motorcycle industry. Success must inevitably follow the whole energies of an individual or organisation directed towards getting on top of the job. Ariel has always enjoyed a reputation for reliability and dependability, a reputation which is only enhanced by the extensive experience in building wartime machines. The stern task of producing Ariels to stand up to the heavy duties of war's demands has been accompanied by sound development, resulting in even better machines to grace a better era. It was an optimistic look towards the future, but Ariel were not the only British motorcycle manufacturer doing their bit for the war effort. Neighbouring BSA, standing for the Birmingham Small Arms Company, rather than any other explanation you might have heard, went into the war as Britain's largest motorcycle company. Val Page had moved to BSA after revolutionising Ariel and had certainly contributed to their pre-war success. Nevertheless, BSA still had a reputation for being reliable rather than innovative, and for military purposes this was definitely in their favour. BSA sold over 126,000 M20 machines for the Allied war effort, and with 67 factories across the UK, their star, most notably of the gold variety, was rising. BSA actually took over Ariel in 1944, a year before the end of World War II, a prelude to further motorcycle company acquisitions. BSA continued to produce the aerial machines under their own name, and early post-war civilian trading saw the Red Hunter pick up exactly where it had left off, and as a 1946 500cc Red Hunter, this is precisely the era of the motorcycling we've been enjoying watching. To a certain degree, all of the motorcycles we've seen so far in this programme have that classic aerial look. But this next machine truly is in a class of its own. This is the Aerial Leader, the culmination of Val Page's lifetime of experience in motorcycle design. And if Yamaha or Suzuki presented it today as a 21st century answer to commuter traffic congestion, it wouldn't seem at all out of place. Yet this motorcycle first rolled off the aerial production line in 1958, unquestionably decades ahead of its time. This particular leader is actually a 1961 model that's been much treasured by its present owner for the last 28 years. Scrap and breakers yards are great places for classic motorcycle enthusiasts in search of precious replacement parts, and this leader ended up at a scrapyard, abandoned, with a coat of bright orange paint. When this collector discovered it there, while rummaging for a part for a BSA Bantam, he couldn't resist it, despite the appalling colour scheme. Getting the leader back on the road wasn't hugely complex, as one of the major plus points of the design was its simplicity. If you're looking for an aerial leader, they're definitely becoming more collectible as time goes on, partly because age and rust does take its toll. Nevertheless, this leader has given very good service over the past 28 years, and even when it has, on rare occasions, proved troublesome, other aerial enthusiasts are never far away. On a trip to Scotland, the little end bearing ceased, but even at a remote Scottish garage, an aerial collector was discovered just a few miles away. By the morning, the bike was fixed and back on the high road. This is nothing unusual in the world of classic motorcycles, and even on the continent, riders have always found like-minded souls to help out in times of breakdown. The generosity of spirit between classic motorcyclists is universal, even transcending language barriers, which all adds to the attraction of these wonderful old machines. From a technical viewpoint, the leader was something of a masterpiece. Val Page literally tore up the rulebook and came up with an easily manufactured tourer that was stylish, effective and economical. A 250cc two-stroke engine hangs from a rigid beam frame made from two simple pressings. Economical to manufacture, the design was nevertheless impressive, with a self-contained fuel tank in the optimum position for the best possible handling. Not that you'd realise there was anything unusual here, because there's a dummy petrol tank between the rider's knees that actually provides the space for a luggage compartment. This allowed for streamlined panniers whilst accommodating the maximum amount of luggage. The entire leader design, although stylish, was eminently practical, even down to the attractive trailing link front forks, which were incorporated to ensure the best possible tyre wear and reliable handling. Equally, the fully enclosed chain case and elegant built-in fairing looked positively space-age, but in fact suited the vagaries of the British weather perfectly. As you would expect, the engine at 250cc did not give the sportiest ride on the planet, but in terms of practicality, it was second to none. It was far from dull, with a 70 mph top speed, and the fuel consumption was remarkable. Cruising at 60 mph would still enable you to get 70 to the gallon, which was a definite bonus. Overall, the Aerial Leader was just the type of design classic that the British motorcycle industry needed, and even the warranty claims were the lowest of the entire BSA group. In fact, there was only one area in which the Leader failed to please, and that was in the lucrative export market to the USA. British motorcycles were well received in America, even dazzling the Hollywood movie industry of the 1950s. Marlon Brando had ridden a Triumph in the cult classic The Wild One, and James Dean, the ultimate rebel without a cause, had appeared the coolest of the cool on his Triumph 500. However, when introduced to the Aerial Leader, the Americans just didn't know what to make of it. In point of fact, they hated it, and the practical all-weather capabilities were lost on a nation where the sun shone a lot more than it did in Britain. Aerial made every effort to rectify the situation by stripping down the Leader to create the Arrow and the Sports Arrow, but still the Americans refused to look at a bike that had strange front forks and appeared to lack a frame. It is for this reason that the Aerial Leader remains a peculiar Great British classic, but way ahead of its time. This machine was indeed the predecessor of many of today's modern touring machines, which are so popular all over the world, and especially in America. And for this collector of classic motorcycles, he's very glad to have found an Aerial Leader tucked away in a scrapyard all those years ago. The future for this machine is assured thanks to his efforts, a real legacy for the motorcycle enthusiasts of tomorrow. Yet this is not the end of the aerial road, thanks to classic motorcycle enthusiasts like the ones who've taken part in this programme. The quality of the engineering and the simple elegance of the designs of Val Page, Edward Turner and Bert Hopwood have ensured that the aerials produced in the Selly Oak factory would survive the test of time. These motorcycles truly are a vivid reminder of a bygone age, and although undoubtedly precious treasures to their owners, they are also extremely important in terms of social history. The aerial story is one of motorcycles, engines and technology, but it also charts the history of industrial Britain through the 20th century. Mention the name BSA, and images of classic motorcycles will instantly spring to mind. But this is a company that has a historic heritage dating back to a time when horses rather than horsepower dominated transportation. BSA actually stands for the Birmingham Small Arms Company, and it was instigated in 1854 when 14 Birmingham gunsmiths joined together to supply arms for the Crimean War. The union was formalised in 1861, but in peacetime the demand for guns gave way to more gentle pursuits, and by 1880 BSA had moved with the times to build bicycles. By the end of the 19th century, motorised transport was evidently going to be the way forward. And in 1903, BSA motorised bicycles started to appear, quickly followed by their first real motorcycle in 1910. Then the storm clouds of war gathered over BSA once more, and at the outbreak of World War I in 1914, production of motorcycles ceased as guns were again manufactured. When the war came to an end in 1918, BSA turned their attention back to motorcycles, and by the 1930s, real progress was being made with BSA's world-famous Star series. The Blue Star was quickly followed by the Empire Star, and eventually the Star definitely turned to gold. This was the heyday of motorcycle racing, and when Walter Handley won the 1937 Brooklands Gold Star on a 500cc Empire Star, the future production of a 350cc and 500cc machine took the Gold Star name, and these BSAs proved to be a huge success with motorcycling enthusiasts everywhere. As the 1930s drew to a close, a Second World War became inevitable, and although motorcycle production continued, BSA's Allied war effort was considerable as they manufactured munitions, shell fuses, and a folding bicycle. Reliability was crucial during the conflict, overseas and on the home front, and BSA's military M20SV proved to be just that, with over 126,000 machines manufactured. Sadly, BSA suffered direct hits during the German bombing raids of Britain, damaging premises, destroying machine tools, and worst of all, killing 53 employees. Between the two world wars, BSA had become the biggest motorcycle manufacturer on a global scale, and claimed that 1 in 4 motorcycles on Britain's roads were BSAs. It was a success that they built upon throughout World War II and in the post-war 1940s and 50s. Despite storming into the 1960s with massive profits, BSA made the same error as their fellow British motorcycle manufacturers by failing to keep up with the times. With little investment in new technology at a time when Japanese imports were becoming highly competitive, in just a decade, BSA was facing financial disaster. In 1971, the company was swallowed up by the government-funded Norton Villiers, and by 1973 it appeared that BSA had reached the end of the road. Yet the BSA legacy is still very much alive and well today in the world of classic motorcycles, with much loved and cherished machines saved and restored for posterity. There have been attempts to revive the Gold Star, but for the purposes of this programme, we'll now take a ride down memory lane to enjoy the sights and sounds of a BSA blast from the past. When this delightful motorcycle first left the company's Birmingham factory, BSA held the ever-expanding motorcycle industry in the palm of its giant conglomerate hand and wouldn't let go. The slogan of the time, being emblazoned on adverts all over the country, was "1 in 4 is a BSA." And this was a boast that was more than backed up by sales statistics and brand loyalty. Many reasons are given for BSA's total stranglehold on this booming market, but the main one seems to be that they simply understood the market they were aiming for. They realised that the needs of the public were for basic, reliable, undemanding machines that would comfortably get the rider from point A to point B without breaking down. The example we have here is a very rare motorbike indeed, of which a limited run were produced. It is a BSA G30 1000cc V-twin with a fixed cylinder head that became available in 1930. This motorbike had the immense power of the machines used for sidecar production, but without the added weight and stability of an attached sidecar itself. In fact, the popular mystery writer of the time, Dorothy L. Sayers, the Oxford University-educated creator of the Lord Peter Wimsey series of detective novels and advocate of women's motorcycling, regularly wrote about motorbike and sidecar combinations, and, for that matter, all types of motorcycles, in her novels and short stories. The sidecar was rarely viewed with the same respect that the solo motorcycles enjoyed, and this practical addition to such a fine machine as this classic BSA was often mocked for its practicality, as this amusing anecdote from the 1930s demonstrates. The sidecar, even in those days, tended to be a dead end as a form of transport. A young man with a solo machine would add on a pillion for his girlfriend and later his wife. When the first child came along, there would have to be a decision: sidecar or four wheels. If economy dictated the sidecar, then four wheels moved still further into the distance. Solo riders passed him with amused sympathy. Poor devil, got married. Motorists passed with amused understanding. Poor devil, can't run a car. And the police would not bother him. Poor devil, got enough on his plate already. The fact that this BSA 1000cc motorbike was sold without a sidecar makes it a powerhouse of a machine with a huge top speed for the era. In 1930, when this beautiful big bike became available, the national speed limit of 20 miles per hour was abolished in the Road Traffic Act, allowing motorbikes of this size and calibre to be bought and ridden by the average man in the street. Machines of this size had been produced and sold before, but only to be used in amateur racing, or the clubman scene as it was more commonly known. In Europe, motor racing took place on public roads, but this had been outlawed in the United Kingdom. This was why the popular TT races were held on the Isle of Man and not the mainland. By the time of the 1930 Road Traffic Act, which took away the 20 miles per hour restriction, the TT was firmly established as a Manx event and still remains so to this day. 1930 was also the year that the Metropolitan Police of London, England, established a motorcycle squad using BSA and matchless machines. In fact, looking through the documentation of the time, the Northampton Divisional Police Force created its own mobile special constabulary, and they bought 4 of the BSA G30 1000cc motorbikes with the strong V-twin engine, just like the model seen here. They were purchased from Percy Spokes, an appropriate name for the agent selling these BSA motorbikes, who had premises in Henry Street, just off Kettering Road in Northampton itself. Of course, it's a little-known fact, but just like the author and rider Dorothy L. Sayers, the first police officers to use motorcycles were actually women. The BSA G30 is a glorious machine. generously lightweight in its design, with sculptured flowing lines, fluted mudguards, and a simple but effective elegance. This particular rare example is jokingly described by its owner as the BSA made in Poland. As with many classic motorcycles, there's a great story behind this nickname, due to the fact that shortly after buying this BSA, the owner was stranded after a breakdown whilst touring Poland. As is often the case on such occasions, a group of local motorcycling enthusiasts seemed to appear from nowhere. Overnight, they opened up a nearby factory, especially to help repair this magnificent machine. In all, 23 Polish Good Samaritans rebuilt it, and none of them could speak much more than a few words of English. When next morning the owner was presented with his repaired motorcycle, he was delighted and politely asked what he owed them. The reply was nicht, or as we would say, nothing. However, there was a proviso. If anyone ever asked about the motorcycle, and needless to say many people do, he was to say that it was a BSA made in Poland. Far from being a hardship, this owner has enjoyed telling the story on numerous occasions, particularly as that all-night motorcycle repair stint happened over 14 years ago, and this lovely old BSA is still running on the parts that those generous enthusiasts from Poland put in all that time ago. So, not only is this BSA an absolute delight to watch out on the open road, you can also be sure that this particular model is absolutely unique. The BSA Gold Star shines brightly in the annals of motorcycle history. This classic machine had its origins way back in 1937, just before the advent of the Second World War. Up until this point, the Empire Star had been the company's best-loved speed machine, and as if to prove the point, a 500cc Empire Star took racer Walter Handley to a famous victory at Brooklands. The following year, a replica machine was created for sale to the general public, and quite naturally, calling it a Gold Star made very good marketing sense. The name Gold Star wasn't only chosen because it reflected Walter Handley's speedy achievements. It was also used because it showed the public that these motorcycles were of the highest quality that BSA could manufacture. They were built out of carefully selected components, tuned and bench tested, with polished valve ports, conrods, flywheels and crankcases. An aluminium cylinder head and barrel was something that had never been seen on a mass-produced motorbike before, and this was a big selling point for the Gold Star. Handley's initial 500cc monster of a machine had quietly metamorphosed into a tidy, oil-tight pushrod single, which was sold initially as a sports bike, but always with racing in mind. So much so that from 1939 onwards, road ratios in the gearbox were optional extras. This was a motorbike that came stripped down and ready for action. With the arrival of the Second World War, production shut down as the terrors of mass fighting, The fears of constant bombing and the pain of senseless killing caused the people of Britain to think of more fundamental issues than a pleasurable ride around the countryside on an expensive motorcycle. However, once the Second World War had come to a close, BSA immediately started working on a post-war Gold Star machine. The very first of these Gold Stars was not on sale to the general public immediately. Amateur racing caught the first glimpse of them in competition, and they were clearly visible in the 1947 Manx Grand Prix and 1948 Clubman's TT. The 1950s were an amazing decade for BSA, which saw them become the biggest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. They produced over 75,000 bikes in 1 year alone. At the start of the decade, the 350cc was slightly revamped, with a larger 8-inch front drum brake, and 2 years later, due to a few minor detail improvements, the 350cc's Gold Stars could easily exceed 95 miles per hour without breaking into an oily sweat. The frame changed too, and became an all-welded construction of single top tube and a duplex cradle under the engine. An effective swing arm suspension was added to the rear, and by 1954, with more tinkering taking place, the 350cc Gold Star achieved that elusive tongue. 100 miles per hour was now the standard. The first win for the 350 machines in the 1949 Isle of Man Clubman's TT gave BSA a taste for success, and this powerful beauty continued to dominate the race until 1956. In the final year of racing, due to the 350 series being discontinued, only 2 of the racers in that particular field rode anything other than a BSA Gold Star. This was truly an amazing tribute to this universally acclaimed motorcycle. As the 1960s dawned, people began to realise that they'd never had it so good, and the whole world seemed to be switched on to free love, peace and freedom, and all everyone seemed to want to do was travel. There was a common desire to escape mundane surroundings, break away from convention and explore new lands and sights. This was a time when you could set out on the highway, look for some adventure, and whatever came your way, to paraphrase a popular song of the time. BSA motorcycles of this era came into their own, with a psychedelic army of lightweight singles, which were sold by the bucket load because of the thousands of new young riders. The particular example we have here is the BSA B40, which looks resplendent in Home Office livery, as this motorcycle was used for the auxiliary fire service. These single-cylinder, overhead valve, 4-stroke motorbikes were perfect for the first-time buyer, and also ideal for the new sport of off-road racing. Indeed, it is said that the BSA lightweight trials models of the 1960s created the modern phenomenon of off-road sport. The BSA 40 grew out of the perennially popular C15 model of the late 1950s. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, BSA came up with some positively explosive names for their motorcycles: Thunderbolt, Lightning, Firebird, Hornet and Spitfire expressed the mood of the moment, and as the real possibility of landing a man on the moon was transformed from science fiction into the NASA space program, BSA came up with the Rocket, one of the best-loved motorcycles of all time. This is a BSA Super Rocket 650cc that was manufactured in 1959. But the first rockets were actually launched some 5 years earlier in 1954. The brief for the designers at BSA had been to come up with a motorcycle that would appeal to the tastes of the American riders, and the Rocket did just that. Quickly nicknamed the Missile with Muscle, the model sold very well in America, but BSA would probably have been pleasantly surprised at the very favourable response the bike got from British motorcyclists, as a great many rockets were actually sold on both sides of the Atlantic. The all-new, improved Super Rocket was introduced in 1957 to build upon this success, and with a price tag of just over £1,000, it was certainly at the more exclusive end of the market. The technical specification included a 650cc overhead valve twin engine with racing valves and springs. There was an Amel TT Racing carburettor, super sports camshaft, and the engine was advertised as having been tuned at the Birmingham factory for maximum horsepower output. In fact, the tagline claimed that the Super Rocket was for the highway rider who wants the response of a competition-type twin. In the late 1950s, the Super Rocket had exceptional power, but was nevertheless perfectly at home out on the open road or in congested traffic. So often at this time, low-end performance was sacrificed to gain power, but not in this case, and with well-designed lines and enough chromium to positively outshine the competition, the Super Rocket was as aesthetically pleasing as it was fast. In the post-World War II years, BSA worked consistently to improve rider comfort, and the Super Rocket boasted a cushy dual seat that offered the ultimate in easy rides. The seating positions for rider and passenger were good with easily operated controls. When it came to gear changing, even the most demanding enthusiast was delighted with the gearbox, as shifting up or down at any speed could be achieved with smooth efficiency. The huge TT carburettor was very responsive to the twist grip, but there was a price to pay for potent power at your fingertips. Petrol consumption was in direct relation to speed, and although the less adventurous rider could lower consumption with careful riding, those concerned about economy rather than speed were unlikely to choose a rocket to project them around the countryside. It's one thing to get up to speed in the shortest amount of time possible, but quite another to stop with the same precision. However, the Super Rocket was never found lacking in the braking department. Whether applied singly or in unison, the Missile with Muscle could be brought to a standstill safely and efficiently without a hint of grab or shudder. A closer look at this Super Rocket's design will reveal a totally enclosed rear chain that helps to keep the back of the bike clean. The generous chromium plating is not only pleasing to the eye, but also protects the tank, fenders, fender stays, exhaust pipes and mufflers, making polishing a pleasure rather than a chore. The handlebars are set quite wide, which explains the Americans' interest in this motorcycle, as it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to visualize the Super Rocket cruising down a Californian highway. And of course, the added bonus of performance that could handle a coast-to-coast trip across the states played its part too, particularly as this roaring beast could be tamed instantly to comfortably transport the workers of Britain to their places of employment through rush hour traffic. All in all, the BSA Super Rocket owner was indeed happy with his lot, and the company's skillful combination of utility and enjoyment made this a motorcycle that has very definitely stood the test of time, despite the fact that the same could not be said for BSA as a company. As our time looking at classic BSA motorcycles draws to a close, it's hard to understand why such an iconic and financially successful company failed to survive beyond the 1970s. When you remember the remarkable star models and Walter Handley's great achievements for BSA on the racetrack, plus the introduction of other timeless classics such as the diminutive Bantam, the A7, A10 and the C15, it's difficult to work out how things have gone so badly wrong. However, BSA were not alone in this respect, because the problems that beset them were the same difficulties faced by the British motorcycle industry in general. The late 1930s witnessed the evolution of AMC, associated motorcycles, and, in theory, the merging of small companies together, in this case Matchless, AJS, Francis Barnett and James, seemed to make a great deal of sense. Meantime, BSA had become the largest motorcycle company in the world, and began a series of acquisitions of their own. They acquired Sunbeam from the newly formed AMC, took over Ariel, one of the greatest names in British motorcycle history, and by 1951 were in the enviable position of buying Triumph. As BSA's major competitor, AMC were also busy in the takeover market, winning the prize of Norton for their conglomeration. The British motorcycle industry had changed beyond all recognition. Gone were the small concerns often run as family businesses, with their talented engineers, creative designers and unadulterated passion for speed. As the years passed, the boardrooms of these mighty industrial giants filled with businessmen who knew nothing of motorcycle design or production, and the consequence was a complete failure to innovate. Even BSA, with its past glories and massive profits, went into a decline as the Japanese manufacturers, such as Suzuki and Yamaha, took full advantage of the situation, importing state-of-the-art, low-cost machines into 1960s Britain. AMC went bankrupt in 1966 and were taken over by Manganese Bronze Holdings, while BSA battled on until they were absorbed by the same consortium to form the Norton Villiers Triumph Group in 1971. Incredibly, BSA, the biggest single manufacturer of them all, was lost and consigned to the history books, and only Triumph, the company bought by BSA in the 1950s, has survived to produce great British motorcycles in the 21st century. But it's not all doom and gloom. Thanks to the many classic motorcycle enthusiasts that delight in tracking down ancient and decaying BSA machines and bringing them back to life. As you've seen during the course of this programme, the BSAs of the past are in very safe hands, which means that new generations of future motorcycle enthusiasts have a very fine legacy to inherit.